Hello, my name is Troy Adu here,
I'm Tyler Hoskins.
and you're listening to our Sick Ass podcast. Kia ora, and welcome to this week's episode of the Sick Ass podcast, episode 12. Now, just a quick message to all of you who are either watching on the YouTube or listening. It will just be me today. Me, if you don't know the voices by now, this is Troy. Tyler had a few things to take care of. He will be back in the lab shortly, but yeah, he just had a few things he had to get on top of, and he will be back with us shortly. Now, so today, and it's been happening for a few weeks now, we've been getting a lot of messages about something that is quite topical at the moment, and it was something that I was quite apprehensive to actually bring some thoughts about. So upon some really heavy reflection, I decided it was time to actually speak out and give a few thoughts on, the Black Lives Matter movement, but mostly, going to be talking about racism here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, I'm just going to do this off the top of my head, basically, just on a few thoughts that have come to me across an entire lifetime as a Cook Islands Māori and Aotearoa Māori. It hasn't been the easiest road to just exist here. It has been a difficult thing to talk about when a lot of people do try to silence you, because what you are saying is definitely, emotive and can make a lot of people uncomfortable. Seeing what has been happening on social media, I think it has been happening for years with people getting a stronger and stronger voice on social media, but it is making a lot of people uncomfortable, and we, get silenced pretty quickly. But now that we are starting to get different platforms and people are starting to come on board, I thought it was, probably time to not hold back anymore and speak. So if you can hear it in my voice, I'm very quite nervous actually as I talk about this, but I think it is something that needs to be done. And I mean, people can either agree with what I'm saying, or I hope that someone can take a different perspective away. Some people will probably think I'm absolutely wrong, but that's the thing, is that these discussions do need to happen in a matter or in a way that isn't actually going to destroy others, but is going to give someone some sort of tool to go forward. So firstly, I have no apologies for using the word white when it comes to describing people. So my first thought would, and these are from conversations that I have been having, is that of course I'd love to live in a world where white or black, it didn't really matter, and your skin color didn't really didn't signify or kind of give any weight to what could happen or what your outcome in this life would be. But I guess because of where we are now, if we were to turn a blind eye to the differences in these colors, that would kind of turn a blind eye to the fact that there does exist a thing called white privilege, and that there are these systems that are in place that help to maintain the power difference between people who are white and those of color. So being afraid to identify that there are differences in skin color, it then minimizes the opportunity to actually see discrepancies in the treatment of people of different color. And that's because you try to bring up these points with different people, and if you were to minimize it on the spot and just say, I don't believe your skin color is going to make any difference to your outcomes, because I don't see color. Right there, anyone who does come to you trusting that you can be someone we can talk to, then feels like how they were feeling in that moment doesn't matter, because everything that we have said, we must be, it's not something that's important, and we might just be imagining some things, and then we just get totally overlooked and we go unheard again. Now, so that's my first thing I wanted to cover. The second one that I wanted to cover is social media. Few people addressing me directly, and saying that, I think because I was posting about the podcast and trying to get our message out there, and a lot of people, saw that as insensitive in a time like this, and they said, your silence on these matters, it shows that you are complicit. And I have a really hard time grasping and trying to find the energy to work with people like that, because before they start to point the finger at someone like me, I think they have to really understand what it is that I actually do for a living. Firstly, I was born into a system that look at me kind of funny. Secondly, I've been through lived experiences of this system playing out, physically. But those are stories I'll get to soon. But also, my postgraduate work is all around decolonizing Western methodologies of research, so that when I work with Indigenous populations or our Māori people here in New Zealand or our Cook Islands people back in the Cook Islands, we are using frameworks that actually privilege the worldviews of those people who actually live there. Everything that I do understands that the university system that we work within is extremely biased towards Western ways of thinking. I don't fly with that. Everything that I do is I understand that we are built on racism, and we are built on this system that sees whites being superior in the way that they think. And I have sat through multiple meetings, and I've presented a lot of my research, and a lot of the questions actually ask about the validity of the research that I am doing, because I can't get a proper p-value, or the instruments that I'm using haven't been validated to Western methodologies. So every single day that I step into the office, every single day that I log into my computer, every single day that I am here, I am working towards trying to better our Indigenous knowledge and trying to make it so that it is something that is seen as normal and not an alternative way of thinking. So for those people who did point the finger at me, I want to know what you are doing day to day that is not an Instagram story. Okay? So that's my second point that I needed to get off my chest, and it feels great. I think now that we get into the context of Aotearoa, it was only maybe just over a year ago now that we had the Christchurch terrorist shootings. And I think the quote or the phrase that came out of that time was, "This is not us." And, that was an isolated individual event, and that wasn't because New Zealand is inherently racist. And I sat back and overt racism for sure. Yes, we can isolate and we can isolate and individualize that. That was one person. I'm not taking away from the fact that was absolutely horrid, but the reason people can get to that level of being that one bad egg or being that one bad apple is the fact that they've been allowed to, or they've been kind of nurtured in the system that believes whites to be superior to people of color. So just a little history lesson for all of you out there. New Zealand, as we know it now, is actually founded basically on racism. Because the Europeans colonized Aotearoa, and to justify the reason for them coming here, they saw it as a civilizing mission. Now, to civilize something would mean that they had inherent belief that they were superior to the quote-unquote savages that they were civilizing. So from the beginning, everything that Europeans have thought that they were bringing to here was because they were superior to the people that they were coming to. Sounds like racism to me, because we have different races, as we see them now, who at the foundation of their beliefs see that there is a power difference between them. Now, when we think about racism, I think that a lot of this does come down to the media portrayals of racism, and these one-off events that are extremely horrible, like when we think about the Holocaust and we think about apartheid, which now, by law are illegal. So people think, racism can't exist because, that it's illegal now. But the foundations from which those events were built, definitely, the pillars still exist. So until we don't see a hierarchy of race, so we don't see a hierarchy of power based on the color of your skin, racism will always exist. Now, obviously I like to call myself the token brown person in a lot of meetings, because, when they want to run all these different things and they need consultation from Indigenous people, I'm one of few who are around, and I get sat down and people talk to me about it, and a lot of the questions are, microphone to my face, just saying, hey, so how are we going to solve this? What is it that we can do? Now, I'm getting kind of sick of that question, because I think when people do ask that question, the intention is not that we are going to just scrap everything that we know and start to build a system that will properly work. A lot of it is like, could we just do like a weekend workshop and then maybe we'll be okay? Like, we can't undo a lot of what we have done unless we scrap the systems or the foundations that everything was built upon. So how can we actually bring proper attention to it if the people who are trying to solve the problem think racism is only when someone is physically harmed or abused, when we're not actually looking at all the different ways that people are, discriminated against because of their skin color? So before I carry on, I think I should probably just talk to you about what racism kind of is properly, without just thinking about it on the very extreme level. So where it all came from was, so basically it's an arbitrary allocation of traits or characteristics based on this color of your skin. So if you could imagine you were walking into your class as a child, or you were walking into any sort of meeting, and every time you walked into the meeting, the convener of that meeting just put their hand up to you. As you walk into this meeting, you put your hand up, you then touch their hand, and she then decides, okay, like, you touch the hand, I'll put you in that corner, you get put in that corner. So depending on who is in charge of this meeting, they could have a small hand or they could have a big hand. Say, for example, we'll use the person with the big hand. Everyone who has the hand that is about the same size or bigger than theirs will then go into one corner. That corner has the best chairs, that corner has heating, that corner has, people coming and serving you coffee, they have everything there. But the people with the small hands, they have to go sit in the other corner, and there's not enough room for them in that corner. First thing that we need to know about this is that because the person who was in charge had a bigger hand, they got to decide that because they were in power, they could see who then could, they got to decide who was at the top of that hierarchy. If we were to switch that then, and someone who was had the small hand when they walked in, they could then decide. Now, regardless of how big your hand is right now, or unless you're a basketballer and you need to hold a ball, hand size is an arbitrary measure for how powerful you can be in society. Humans dictate that, and the humans who are in charge are the ones who dictate that. So if we just took everything we know about the hand, well, as far as I'm aware, there is no research that would say that your hand size says anything about your characteristics, says anything about the traits of you as an individual. If I'm wrong, please send me the link. But where we then take the hand out and start to put skin color in, the hierarchy goes from white all the way down to blacks. But characteristics are attributed to each of them. So, the better thinkers, the more superior the whites, and then as you go down to, the blacks, they cheat, they're liars, all of these different traits based on the fact that their skin is the way it is. So if we were to think about the hands that we were talking about earlier, if you walked into me and you had the same hand as me, I was like, you are a very trustworthy person. But if someone came in and they had a small hand, they put it up against my hand, I'd say, oh, small hand, usually a liar, usually a cheater. I can't trust you. Sorry, you can't come in. So that's just something to kind of get your head thinking around there. So, there's going to be people whose minds are getting boggled right now. But then, you also have to think that there are genuinely people out there who believe there is a superior race and that there is a subordinate race. And as I said, just because of the color of their skin, nothing to do with anything that they have done. And the saddest thing, which I'll get to shortly, is that we as Indigenous people have grown up in a system where people do tell us that we're overrepresented in negative stats, and we're also underrepresented in the people who are on the big screen that people want to be like. So we're constantly reminded that that must be true. All of these different things that people say about us must be true, and we start to internalize those feelings. So I have a challenge for our Pacific and Māori brothers and sisters, but we'll get there shortly. You can see, as I touched on there, that the foundation is set where basically we live where white is right, and it becomes the theme song and the truth. And then once you have that foundation, you start to apply the treatment, and then you lay in the evidence that whites are superior. So if you see all those silly science where they'd say that the different skull sizes had to do with something like smaller brains, and therefore they are less intelligent. There's two camps when it comes to the stats that we have here in New Zealand, and that justify that whites are superior, and the disparity is testament to the superior intelligence and inherently much suited to the world. So that would be, who has higher socioeconomic status, who has greater education, better health, and the prison stats. So that's one way of thinking that. It's like, because we have these statistics, it shows that we are definitely more superior. Or there's Camp B, which I think you'll probably know is where I sit, is that this world is actually created to serve whites. Hence all the positive accolades that come with just living and being able to be the way that you want to be in those moments. Of course, everything's going to be set up to work for you. Of course, all the positive health outcomes and all the positive statistics are going to suit when the world that you're living in speaks the same language as you do. So, I just, to make this a bit more clear for you, I have a few more thoughts, and I'm going to use what I know best, and that is sport. So, a lot of you might be thinking right now, how is he going to use sport to start to explain everything that's going on? But if we think about, I think we'll try to bring this closer to home for those who still can't quite get it. Now, think of position stacking. So there is something called position stacking, and that can happen both on the field. So, for example, in rugby, when they put people in different positions, some of it happens before people actually try out or people actually show their abilities. For example, Fijians. When I said that, when you thought about rugby, you thought it straight away to the wing. So that's just, that is a clear example of us putting characteristics, or assigning characteristics or traits to people based on the colors of their skin or their ethnicity. Now, as though Fijians, you tend to put them on the wing. And thinking positions such as quarterbacks in NFL or first fives in rugby, that's where they tend to put whites, because that was a very sarcastic, obviously, whites are more intelligent. That is a playmaking role, so that is where they will put them. So that's just a quick example of position stacking. Now, I hope you're thinking of other examples as well. Maybe I'm reading into it a bit too much. Maybe I'm not. But it's just something to think about. And then there's also position stacking in terms of administration. Yes, on the field, a lot of the players do represent me. But who are their coaches? Who are their managers? And who are the people that sign all the checks for these people? I can guarantee they do not look like the people on the field. And if they do, they'll get a little bit of media coverage just to say, look, we're ticking all these boxes, but they don't actually have a clear representation of the people. Now, a lot of the media coverage around drug cheats, this is something that I thought about recently, but, drug cheats in sport, there's two different reasons why you'd use it. One is just to be the best that you can be, and you want to be as greedy as possible. So you already have what you have, but you want to be one of the greatest. And then there's also, for some reason where people do get caught taking drugs to become better, there becomes some sort of racial narrative around it. So some of the people I know definitely in baseball, they're from South America, and they are literally coming from nothing. They're low socioeconomic class, and the reason they take these drugs is because if they are to make it in baseball, this is their one way out, and they can finally provide for their family. When they are caught, though, it adds to the narrative that the Mexicans and whatnot, they all, they're liars, they're cheaters, and that is why they use these drugs. No one ever actually thinks about the socioeconomic impact that if they were to make it, this could have on them. But that same coverage is not then shown for the people who are white, and that same thing happens. Like, there probably are a few examples, but the lying and the cheating and everything that goes on with that, like, it becomes a racial thing rather than the fact that these people did all that they can. They would try to win at all costs so that they could then go back and help their family. Now, it's on the aggregate. I'm talking on the aggregate. I'm not talking about every single example. So that's another example of sport. Now, there's a notion called bodily habitus. And this is something that I thought about with regards to sport and the types of sports that we play. And basically what the question of this is, who is actually doing the labor? And if we think about lower to upper socioeconomic classes, we can think of the types of sports that they play, but we can also think about the labor that they would be doing. So at the upper end, usually they are so far removed from the labor that they don't actually really expend any sort of energy at any point. And then the lower you go, they start to become the people doing the labor. So if we think about this from a sporting perspective, the people who are at the top, either watching sport or when they do play sport, they are far away from the contact. So, for example, think about your golfs, think about polo. So in polo, they're literally not even running and they're not even making contact with the ball. They are riding a horse and they are, hitting the ball with a stick or whatever they call those things. But, not only are they not carrying out the labor, but they also, the barrier to entry for a sport like that is huge because, you need to have the space to have horses, you need to maintain your horses, and you also need to have, there's resources involved with that. And then the lower you go, you start to think about the sports that a lot of us are playing, and a lot of us are playing rugby. And because, a lot of us are playing contact sports or rugby or boxing, and that's just because it's a very low barrier to entry. All we need to do is put ourselves on the line and play. And that was something that for me as a child growing up was, it was normal for me to think about my only job perspective was to be a rugby player because, you're good at it. It's probably one of the only things that you can do. And this is where things at school started to really, freak me out because I didn't understand what was going on, where everyone kind of channeled all of my energy into playing rugby. But I was so, into school. I loved my education and I loved learning. But I was always told, you should probably, think about rugby, or like when I did do well at school, it was, oh, you're really smart. And it was so surprising to a lot of people that I was, the first in my class for a lot of things. And I had no idea why. No one could ever tell me why it was so fascinating to these people. And the frustrating thing is that right now we have a lot of people who keep channeling, and this is some of the work of Brendan Hokowhitu, who actually came from our physical education, sport and exercise science, where he talks about we try to funnel a lot of our Māori and Pacific Islanders into sport. And his reasoning for why it is that we are being channeled into these sports is so that we can be taken away from any sort of educational or academic avenues where we can actually express free thought. Now, this is not me going at you rugby players and saying that you can't express free thought, but what does happen to the people who get that platform and then they're taught media training and they're taught what they are and aren't allowed to say? They're then controlled in some sort of way. Now, I sound like a real conspiracy theorist right here, but all those people who do talk out of line because they're not following protocol then get made an example of what you're not to be. And the people who look most like us are then our role models, and they are the people we aspire to be. So not only do we aspire to play the way that they do so that we can get on the field, we also kind of manipulate our behaviors so that we can try to be more like them as well, because they're our role models. We want to be like them. We want to do everything that they're doing. If they're drinking Gatorade, I want to drink that too, because that might help me get to where they are. So those are just another couple of things that we need to think about. In terms of education, okay, so I've thought about this multiple times, and as you can hear through this, I'm losing a lot of what I'm saying because I am getting quite emotional as I'm talking through this, and I still haven't been able to calm down, and my breaths have been higher just because it's something that to me is taking me an entire PhD to try to get my head around. And a lot of people think that putting money into education, it's just money, more money. They need higher education. They need, because if they increase their education, they're going to increase their socioeconomic status and they can increase their health disparities. It doesn't matter. And the reason why I say this now is because it doesn't matter how educated someone becomes, it's never going to change the way a white person's going to look at me. They're either going to be scared of me or they're going to think that I am someone who is going to cause harm to someone else. And the reason I say this is because I almost have a PhD, but when I go through airport security, I get pulled to the side nearly every time. When I'm in shops, people definitely have a cautious eye on me because they think I'm going to shoplift. Security guards in different places will always double take if they see me. And, white families, if I'm around, they're a bit cautious. Until they actually got to know me, they would have no idea, and they would just assume that I am just another brown person, someone who puts them at danger, because that's what everyone believes. So are you telling me that if we continue to educate and just offer opportunities of education, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm just saying it doesn't change the mind of the people who continue to make this a problem? So, I'm just proving a point right now is that we can get very angry and passionate because it just keeps happening to us over and over again. And when we want to be heard, it's either not the right time or the right place or the right tone for the people who need to listen. Or when we do explain it, apparently we say something wrong or something's too harsh for them, and they just turn off completely and they become very defensive, and they don't want to answer us anymore because we didn't provide the right environment for them to have a nice critical lens for them to think. And the reason why we get the way that we do is because we have to keep going through the same process over and over again, and we keep getting ignored. But then that same passion, that same anger from having to go through everything that we are going through is the reason why we come out so fiery with these things. But apparently, we're not allowed to talk to you this way. So that brings me to another point, which is white fragility. When things start to get rough for you, and I can tell you, if you properly want to work on this, it is going to get rough, because it is not easy when you have to confront something about yourself, when you have to take responsibility for anything that you are doing. I can guarantee you it is very, very uncomfortable. But if you aren't reaching some sort of level of discomfort, I can guarantee you are not growing or you are not learning, because you are staying comfortable and you are not addressing what needs to be addressed. And the reason why I am so passionate about this is because I have had to live this. Now, when we talk about research, we talk about the different statistics, and we talk about not getting in your emotions. But I think it is very difficult when you have been discriminated against time and time again. And there are people who look like me, who think I'm silly. And that's absolutely fine. But these people have not had to go through some of the things that we have had to go through. I have a few stories. One would be back at school, a phone went missing. But it was a phone that went missing in the period before lunch. I was not at school in the period before lunch, and neither were three of my friends because we had rugby training. We come back after lunch, and there was a bunch of names that were given forward, and as we came back into class after lunch, there was a group that was taken outside. Me and my three mates were also taken outside because we were suspects for taking the phone, even though we weren't in the room. Interesting. That's all I'm going to say about that. And probably the one that made me really realize that it's not on, and it's unfortunate that I have to bring it up with the police, but when I was 15 years old, I was walking past a group of teenagers, probably around my age. I didn't know them, and as I was walking past, I guess the timing was wrong, and I was chased, and I was kind of just walking. I didn't stop because I didn't think they were talking about me, and slammed into a car, and then put in handcuffs because apparently I was running away, and I was just the most innocent and naive child. I was so scared, and I just didn't know how to talk. And I got myself into more trouble because I was so startled that, it was just very scary. But, not only is that something that's troubling for me, just to understand how it is that I can walk down a street and immediately be a threat, but also, can you imagine if you are a father, if you are a mother, and you know that your 15-year-old, just scrawny son is out there being manhandled just because he exists? Just let that sink in for now. So, what do we really need to do? We need to really understand that racism exists even if it doesn't directly happen to you, even if it isn't a physical abuse or verbal abuse. The ways in which we act, what we turn blind eyes to, everything that we allow to happen on the daily is all part of it. So what we need to do is we need to look around and we need to see injustice, and we always need to bring attention to it. Everything that I'm seeing on social media has been, it's the most attention I've ever seen, but let's not make it a trend. Let's keep highlighting the indifferences, and let's keep highlighting all of the injustices, because if we can keep highlighting all of these different things, maybe people will start to treat us slightly different. And it's going to be like anything. It's going to take time. But by step by step, if we keep making these little changes and people start to call out all of the shitty shit that's happening, maybe, just maybe, the people who are in charge will start to take notice and actually make proper change that informs a lot of the people who need to be informed. Or maybe those people at the top will actually start to look like me. And this is a quick message to all my Māori and my Polynesian Pacific brothers and sisters. It is now your responsibility to be the best that you can be, not in spite of all the people who want you to, who don't want you to succeed, but for your families, for your ancestors, for everyone who's laid down everything that they could for you to be where you are. You need to take responsibility, and if doing it for your family is not a strong enough cause, I suggest you learn your whakapapa and know where it is you are from and know who it is you are serving when you do your work. Success is the best revenge, but we shouldn't be doing this for revenge. We should be doing this to step ourselves in the right direction and to leave this place better than it was when we walked. Thank you for listening to me ramble. I hope you can take something away from this. If there is anything in this that you disagree with, or if there's anything in this that gave you a new perspective on what you are doing, please reach out to me and let's have a discussion. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Sick As podcast. I absolutely, I needed this. I needed to talk about this. It was a great reflection for me. And yeah, if you tuned out halfway, that's absolutely fine. But I hope you can take something away from this. So that has been episode 12 of the Sick As podcast. Take care.